You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Ford,
Corey Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Sherwin Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is
Camille Di Maio.
Thanks for tuning into Author Stories, bringing you the very best author interviews from the best writers writing today. I'd like to thank some sponsors today that make the show possible. Patricia Gillum, A Superhero's Duty, a fight between a second-generation superhero named Red Bolt and a villain for hire named Icarus goes terribly wrong, resulting in the drowning deaths of 3 innocent civilians and orphaning a 6-year-old boy. Racked with guilt, Red Bolt visits Cameron Wilson at the hospital every night and won't leave the boy's side until he falls asleep. Befriended by a night shift nurse, the man in costume begins to disclose what really happened after the fight and why he feels the deaths of Cameron's parents and sister fall on his actions. A superhero didn't survive that night, and Cameron and the rest of the city aren't out of danger. A Superhero's Duty by Patricia Gillum. There's a link to it in the show notes. I'd also like to tell you about my friend Crystal Pico Watanabe of Pico's House. The Pico's House website now has a new look. Visit Crystal and her team of 8 people who help her provide services to fiction authors. Crystal's full slate of services now include beta reading, manuscript critique, developmental editing, line editing, copy editing, and proofreading. Authors, you can also inquire about putting your books in her Book Lovers Box, which is a monthly digital subscription box with a different theme each month. This is free for authors for a limited time. PicosHouse.com for all your book publishing needs. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, I'm really excited to have Camille Di Maio on the show with me today. She has a fantastic new book called The Beautiful Strangers, and it is out everywhere today when you're hearing this. We've got a lot to talk about today. Welcome to the show, Camille.
Hi, Hank. Thanks for having me.
Well, thank you for joining me today. I'm going to apologize to the listeners ahead of time. We're in the middle of a thunderstorm, so if anything goes crazy, that's why. But Camille, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
My first memory of wanting to be a writer was in grade school. I went to Catholic grade school in Aurora, Colorado, and I just I got bullied, and I spent recesses in the library instead of the playground. And I went through just about everything this library had, especially the Nancy Drews and the Trixie Beldens. I really liked mystery. I don't know why I don't write mystery, because that's what I read as a kid. But I was really intrigued by who these authors were, and I would look at the names on the book and just imagine that they were just my heroes, these authors. And I thought, I want to be one of them someday. So some people look at sports heroes or superheroes, and I looked at authors as heroes because they just rescued me, and I wanted to be one someday. So I was probably about 12 when that came about.
Oh, wow. I love that so much. And what an indelible memory that when you're going through a hardship and a trial in your life, that these stories, not to be, melodramatic, but kind of rescued you in a way, and that the people that made these stories became your heroes. I love that. When did you, begin to work on your own stories? Did you, while you were reading these stories and had this experience, did you start trying your hand at it?
I wrote little short stories, and my mom would read them and tell me, these are great, you're going to publish someday. And I really didn't believe it. I just kind of wrote them because I felt like I needed to write. But the idea of actually publishing and becoming one of those authors someday just seemed, like I could develop supernatural powers someday. It just seemed so out of reach. But as I got older, I really did some blogging, and I lived in San Antonio for a long time. So I blogged about San Antonio, and I got great responses to what I would write. And my husband really knew that I wanted to write a book, and he was the one who kept telling me, you can do it. I said, no, I don't have a full-length book in me. I don't think I can sustain that. And he said, no, you can do it. So he's been a great support, and I started that process in my mid-30s then. So it took a very long time, and I hope any aspiring writers out there that you have listening don't take as long as I took, but you got to start sometime. So
you do.
I had my courage in my 30s.
Well, I've heard so many stories from writers, and there's a common thread that goes through a lot of people's stories, and that's the encouragement that they received a lot of times at a young age from either a parent or a teacher or someone who just recognized that gift and planted those seeds that later, sometimes it takes until our 30s for those things to take root and really start growing. And then your husband who continued that encouragement. Writing can be such a lonely, solitary endeavor. But it's those little pieces of encouragement I think that we hold on to that really help us through those dark, lonely days.
It does. And I think that current aspiring authors are very fortunate to be living in an age of social media, because back when I started writing, it was barely happening. But even as a 12-year-old, it definitely wasn't happening. The internet hadn't even been invented yet. So it was incredibly solitary to write at that time. But now it's just an amazing thing that you can build community with other writers. I mean, you can live anywhere in the world and you can build community, even if it's online community. It's a very real thing. I have dear friends who I've never met in person. And so it doesn't have to be as solitary as it used to be. So if you don't have a parent or a spouse or somebody personally in your life encouraging you, I would really suggest reach out to the vast social media community that's out there, and you will find your tribe, you'll find your group, and you'll find your encouragement.
Such a great point. And people are listening to this over the internet. We've connected with one another in so many great ways. I mean, this show is thanks to the internet and the way that we can communicate with each other and get things out to people. It really is, the best day and age to be alive for a writer, I think.
It is.
Yeah.
And I write historical fiction and do a lot of research. I don't know how people wrote historical fiction without the internet.
Oh my goodness. You spent, half of your writing time in the library, I would assume.
I think so, but gosh, information is so instant. It almost becomes, you have so much information, you have to decide what to use.
Right.
So it's a nice to be a writer.
Right. So you had doubts in yourself about being a writer. The people around you saw it, but you just hadn't gotten up the courage yet. What were you doing with yourself during your 20s and up until you recaptured that spark in your 30s?
I got married fairly young. I got married at 22, and I had our first child at 23, and then had 4 children total. I was a realtor with my husband for a long time in San Antonio, homeschooling my 4 kids, and so it's kind of a classic. I was way too busy to think about really taking writing seriously. But as my husband encouraged me more, I just thought, okay, the right story has to come to me, and then maybe I will. And then it was driving my kids around on errands one day when a story idea came to me that became my first book ultimately. And it just, the fever hit me. I had to write this book, and I pounded out a draft in 6 weeks, staying up till 3 and 4. And like a good Texan girl, I was drinking Dr. Pepper to stay up late. And I got this first draft done. Now, first draft was not great, but I got it done. 17 drafts later, I got an agent, and but that was a lot of hard work. But it makes me want to tell writers that it doesn't matter how busy you are, you can fit this in. And once I realized that, I was as busy as anybody else out there, full-time job and homeschooling 4 kids. So that's pretty busy.
That's, my wife and I have 5 kids, and she homeschooled all of them up to a certain point, and then they, went to high school and stuff at our local high school. But people have no idea how insanely busy that is, and what a huge time commitment. I mean, the parenting switch never turns off.
No, it doesn't. And then just working on top of that, I was able to mostly work from home as a realtor, but I did need to go out with my buyers plenty of times. And so that was a 7-day-a-week job right there. So I really believe anybody who wants to do this can do it. You just have to finally commit.
Right. I would imagine working in real estate would be a great place to hear people's stories, and because you're learning about people, and they're making one of the biggest decisions of their lives, and telling you about themselves. Do you ever think back on those times and think, oh, I'm so glad I had this experience because it's opened my eyes to, I don't know, what people go through in certain things. Do you feel like that time has helped you as a writer?
It really has, and I think sometime it will go into a future book if I write something contemporary, because being a realtor, even if I was already friends with people, it puts you deeply into the most intimate parts of their lives, because you are now handling their most important investment.
Right.
You're handling their divorce. You're handling the death in the family that prompted it. You are really getting involved in those many times difficult moments and many times happy moments too, but you're right in there with people. And I felt like being a realtor, I was also holding, I had the hat of doctor and psychiatrist and psychologist and financial advisor. It's a lot of hats to wear. And I think it will be very good story fodder someday, but I think I need to be a few more years distant from it before I'm ready to commit it to paper.
I love that. Camille, you studied political science, didn't you?
I did. So I went to college for political science and then met my husband as interns in Washington, D.C.
So, what was it about politics that excited you?
I just really believe in going and supporting and fighting for the things that are important to me. They're a candidate or an issue. And I wanted to do, I always vote, and I think everybody should vote, but I really wanted to do more than vote. I wanted to make sure I was door knocking and sending out mailers and making phone calls, all the grassroots stuff. We were grassroots campaigners kind of people, which has served me really well in the writing, because I'm kind of a grassroots PR person for my books and for friends' books too. It just kind of turns out that way. But I think I learned those chops being in politics.
Do you think
but I will say it chews you up and it spits you out. So
I can only
I'm
imagine.
glad I did not do it as a career.
I love political drama, TV and movies and books. It just solidifies my desire to never be close to politics. But I love to watch it.
Yes, it creates a lot of drama, and it's when it's the drama in your life, that's not so great. And I think my husband and I both went into politics with very naive ideals, and whichever side of the aisle we were exposed to, and we were at various different times, there was a huge segment of the population who was really just out there to get ahead and step on the person to get ahead, and it happens both ways, and there was an ugliness to it that we were both very happy to remove ourselves from. So now we really get involved locally. We'll do local things, but we're both very glad it's not our career.
Yeah. Well, let's leave the drama on the page and not in the living room. Yeah. I feel
it. As you know, having 4 or 5 kids brings enough drama in your house anyway.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It absolutely does. So tell me about that story. You said you're riding with your kids, running errands, and this idea just drops on you, and then you pound out the manuscript in 6 weeks, and you have that first draft. You have a whole book in 6 weeks, and yes, it needed editing and all of that good stuff, but you had a whole book at the end of that. The cliche question that you ask writers is, where do you get your ideas from? And the truth is, ideas are everywhere. You just have to figure out which one is the idea. What was this idea that just dropped on you, that then, made a book alive in 6 weeks?
Well, I think what you put out there is what you get back. I do believe in that. And so I had just read the Twilight series. My oldest daughters both wanted to read it, and I felt like they might be just a little young. They were just on the age where I wasn't so sure. So I thought, well, I'll read these and see if they're okay for them. And I ended up reading all 4 books in 3 days. So I was really liking it. So this idea of this forbidden romance was really on my mind. And so I started thinking, I think I'd like to write something about a forbidden romance. And so that was one little compartment. So then just days later, I'm just driving and doing errands, and I had my iPod on shuffle, which has literally like 5,000 songs on there. And the song Eleanor Rigby by the Beatles came through, and I love that song. And my dad made me a Beatles fan. And somehow, because I think I had planted in my mind that I wanted to write a forbidden love story, and then the song comes on the radio, I thought about the 2 characters in the song in this brand new way suddenly, this Father Mackenzie and Eleanor Rigby. And they never meet in the story, or in the song. You don't know if they know each other. You just know that he buries her at the end. But they don't tell you anything else. And so suddenly I thought, wow, what if they knew each other, and what if they had a history? What might their story have been? And it just consumed me. The idea of what it could be consumed me. And so I worked backwards. I looked at the release date of the song in the 1960s, and I thought, okay, about what age might they have been? So what age would they have been when they were young adults? And it put me smack in World War II. And because it's the Beatles, I set it in Liverpool, which I had never been to at the time. So suddenly I had the story, these two people, a Catholic seminarian, a young Protestant socialite who meet and in Liverpool, and there the story begins, and it turned into their story. Now, the names are different in the final published book, but that's where the inspiration came from.
That is absolutely fantastic. I am a huge McCartney fan, and a huge Beatles fan, as well.
I have to follow up with the end of that story real quick.
Okay, please.
This then. So, fast forward to a few years later, it took me 4 years to finish 17 drafts where I felt like it was really ready to send out. And we found out that Paul McCartney was making kind of an unscheduled or surprise visit to San Antonio to be the opening act or to be the first act of a brand new theater center that was being built. And so it was a 1,700 person venue. And he had not played a venue that small in 10 years outside of Liverpool. So it was a phenomenal event that was going to happen. And I was able to go, and I had this little sign that said I wrote a book about Eleanor Rigby, and he played the song, which I learned, just 6 feet away from me, Paul McCartney plays the song Eleanor Rigby that I just devoted the past 4 years of my life to. And I learned later that never in a tour had that song been on his set list. This was the first tour he was doing that song, so it just felt meant to be. And I unfolded my little sign at the end of the song, and I could tell that he saw it, and I folded it right back up. And long story short, he called me up to the stage and asked me to give him a copy, and then he started reading it to the audience. And that was really one of the best moments of my life.
Okay, well, thanks for tuning in to the Author Stories podcast. There's nothing left to say after that. Thanks for tuning in. That is mind blowing. I can't even. I'm smiling from ear to ear for you. I will never get a better story than that. That is.
I had to tell you that after you said you liked it.
That's incredible. Amazing. That's absolutely incredible. And that book went on to be The Memory of Us, right?
Yes.
Wow. So, McCartney aside, how did you find your agent and your editor that loved the book like you did, and it found its way to the world?
It was pounding the pavement, except with the keyboard. I think almost every author will probably have all their nightmare query stories, and so mine followed a very similar route with that. And I started right after I wrote the first draft. I didn't know what I didn't know, basically. I just thought, I finished a book, and I started querying way before this book was really ready to send out. So I got a fair number of rejections, understandably. But I knew that I wanted it traditionally published, so I knew that this is the route. I need to get an agent, so I clearly need to make it better if I'm going to attract the attention of an agent. And so for 4 years, on and off, because I was being a realtor and a mom, but every few weeks I would send out a new batch of a few queried letters. But as I got better at the query letters, and as I made the book better, the responses started getting better and better. And in the end, I had 2 offers of representation from an agent, and I just picked the one, and then she got me the book deal a few months after that.
Hearing the story of The Memory of Us and how it was inspired by Eleanor Rigby and how the inspiration of the song naturally led it to be set when the story is set makes perfect sense. All of that, the story had to be set there. This is it sounds to me that you didn't set out to write a historical fiction. It just, the book was that, and that's just the way it needed to be. Your other 3 books tend to be historical fiction, or set at least a few decades before us now. What is the desire and the draw for you writing in previous times than when we're living?
Well, like you said, historical fiction really found me because of that story. Although as I look back on what I read a lot of growing up, it was a lot of historical fiction and a lot of classics. And I realized that I loved learning through story. I did not love learning through textbook. So it kind of dawned on me that I think it had always been there. I just didn't realize it. And what I fell in love with in the writing process with The Memory of Us was all the research. The research was just fantastic, and some of my favorite parts of the story were not originally in my mind. They came because of something I was researching about Liverpool or about the history of the area, and I would say, oh my gosh, this needs to be in the book. And I just completely fell in love with that research process. And so a lot of readers, and I'm meticulous about it. I'm meticulous, and my readers love that. I hear a lot of feedback about how much they felt they learned, but they didn't really realize they were learning because they were caught up in story. And so that is one of the best compliments I always hear, because I love to bring about these little nuggets of history in that way. So I have a lot of ideas for historical fiction. I do want to write contemporary someday, but I have so many historic ideas. I'm just going to keep going for a while.
Well, there's so many stories to tell. My wife and I are both kind of genealogy fans. I don't know that we'll say nuts, but we love to collect the stories from our families, and the farther we get away from historical events, the less we know, naturally, as things kind of get away from us. And I love finding out who these people were and what was going on then, and just looking at how different our life is now to what they went through and things that they had to deal with. Do you find it easier to talk about these times and experiences that happened before? Is it easy to separate yourself, or do you think modern a modern setting would be more difficult because people are more aware and in tune with everything around us?
I think there's a few reasons I like going back there. One is that I'm really a PG kind of writer. My books are clean. They're not squeaky clean. They're about PG. And you can write about the 1940s and write in a very authentic PG kind of manner, because there were some social taboos out there that are really not here now. And I feel like if I wrote contemporary, I would really have to grapple with how do I make this very authentic to today, but still kind of stay true to how I like to write. So historical just really lets me have that outlet, and I enjoy that a lot. And the other thing I like is that as different as their circumstances might have been, I really like the thread of how we are all the same. They had great love, they had great dreams, they had great sacrifices. So I like to find how do I connect to these characters with a contemporary mind, understanding that we really had so many of the same dreams and loves, but our surroundings and our circumstances were different. So I approach it with a contemporary mind, and then I let the history fill in the details.
When you have such a lightning bolt idea like you had for The Memory of Us, and it proves out over and over again that this was a truly inspired lightning bolt kind of moment with this book. As you tell the whole story, going through, McCartney reading the book to people. I mean, that's one of those stories you just can't top. After all of that is over, and then you're sitting like all of us writers do, no matter what the great accomplishment previous was, we always come back to the blank page, and then you have to start over and do it all over again. How do you follow up an experience like that with a brand new story?
Well, it's funny because all I ever wanted to do was write a book. It was very singular in my mind. It didn't even dawn on me, even in my 30s, that you could have a career doing this. I just didn't put that together until days after The Memory of Us came out, and it was doing well. My agent said, "So what's next?" And I went, "Oh, I haven't really thought about it, what's next." But then as I thought about it, I realized that there was this story idea that was very much in my mind. I just had not thought about developing it into a book. And it came off of a documentary when we were just channel surfing one night, and it was a documentary about miracles and how science was trying to disprove miracles. And I found that interesting. And as I was watching that, I had this picture kind of pop up in my head of a portrait of a little girl, and the portrait was crying. And that became this starting point for what became my second book, Before the Rain Falls. And so my writer brain started thinking, well, who is the little girl? Why is the portrait crying? Is it really a miracle? Is science going to disprove it? Who are the characters around it? And I started answering all my questions, and suddenly I had this idea. And I was so grateful that my publisher took a leap on me with it, because here I'd just written this World War II forbidden romance kind of story, and I'm suddenly submitting to them this idea for a book that takes place in a Texas border town and a Texas women's prison in the 1940s. Completely different. And they took that risk with me because they aren't trying to make cookie cutter writers over at my publisher, and I like that. So that's what my second book became, and it's radically different, but it still has my voice. It still has my historical research, and that was very well received too. So I'm grateful that my publisher lets me be very diverse in that. But I do tend to stick with the 40s, give or take a decade. I like that.
Well, that's one thing that I really love about historical fiction, especially the really great roster of historical fiction authors that we get to read now and that are publishing now, is that there was one time where historical fiction was thinly veiled romance that was just and there were just kind of obvious formulaic romance stories couched in, whichever decade. And a lot of them were cookie cutter, the same kind of book. But what we're seeing now are some great stories that show the totality of humanity, and that we can have a story that there may be a romantic element. There's also a mystery element. There's the totality of our human experience. And it sounds to me like that's really what you're after. You're looking for the human story that will connect with people on a deep level.
I think so. And as I look back on my stories, there are elements in all of them of love, sacrifice, and redemption. And there's always a romantic love in my books, although I would definitely stop short at calling them romance books, because it's not always the main theme of it, but it's always there because that's a big part of humanity. But the second book is very much about the love of sisters and what one sister would sacrifice for another. And in my third book, The Way of Beauty, it's about two women who love the same man, but they forge a friendship together. And I wanted to really illuminate that women can have beautiful friendships, even if that kind of issue is going on with them. So that one was about the love of friendship in women. So I like to explore that a whole lot.
Well, and that brings us to your fourth book and your newest book that's out now, The Beautiful Strangers. Tell us about this book. Who are the characters that we meet? And did you have a lightning bolt moment for this book?
This one the lightning bolt moment was more about the setting than anything. My husband went to Marine Corps boot camp in San Diego, so we've been back to San Diego multiple times. And several years ago, we were there for the Romance Writers of America conference, and we went out to Coronado, as we always do when we're in that area. And it's an idyllic place. If there is a paradise on earth, I think it might be Coronado. And the crown jewel of this little island of Coronado is the Hotel del Coronado, which is just legendary. It's amazing. And so my husband and I were walking on that beach, and he said, "You love this place. You need to write something set at the Hotel del Coronado." And that just struck me. I was just kind of enjoying being at the beach, and he really prodded me to think about what kind of story could I write. And I did know that the film Some Like It Hot with Marilyn Monroe was filmed there. And so when he made this suggestion, I immediately went to the movie and 1958. And I thought, oh, that's kind of the era that I write. That would work. And then later in doing research on the hotel, my husband actually found the story of the ghost, Kate Morgan, and how she was found dead on the steps in the late 1800s. And it was never determined if she committed suicide or was murdered. And there were varying tales about her, varying names that she gave. So there was tons of mystery surrounding her that never got answered. But most people are in agreement that she is the ghost that haunts the hotel. So I had this piece of history in the late 1800s that I found fascinating. And I had the movie set in 1958 that I found fascinating. And I thought, how do I take these two elements and create a story with both of these elements? And so I ended up doing that by creating a 1958 character also named Kate Morgan, and she finds herself at this hotel because her dementia-riddled grandfather tells her, go find the beautiful stranger. And so she discovers she shares a name with the hotel's ghost, which they do call her the beautiful stranger. And yet it's 1958, so she also finds herself on the movie set of Some Like It Hot. So that's kind of the backdrop of how I created those characters, but the inspiration moment was really just the hotel itself. It's remarkable.
So much fun. What was the most exciting part about writing this book? Was it getting to kind of juggle the timelines of the characters? Was it writing in a scene that we all will recognize from Some Like It Hot? What was the one thing that was super exciting about writing this?
The most exciting thing for me was writing the prologue, and the prologue is told in first person from the perspective of the Kate Morgan in the 1800s. She's arrived at the Hotel del Coronado, and so I play out in this prologue what happened to her as I imagine it to be. And in all of my writing, I have never connected with a voice as much as I connected with hers as I wrote this prologue. And I only ever intended for her part of the story to be the prologue, and the rest was going to all take place in 1958. But I connected so well. Of all the things I've ever written, I think the prologue is the best thing I've ever written. And I just went, her story has to be more than the prologue. So that was the most exciting moment, is when I finally had that voice. You know, authors talk about, oh, this character spoke to me. And I never have felt that before until that moment. And this character was saying, I need to be in this book in a bigger way. And I went, oh, I finally tapped into that magic that authors talk about. So that was exciting for me.
That's so much fun. When you're writing a book, are you a linear writer and write from beginning to end? Do you write scenes that come to you, and how much preparation goes into a book before the actual writing?
The Memory of Us, my challenge with it was I was writing it in a linear way. And going back to Twilight and the author of that, Stephanie Meyer, I was on her website learning about her process. And her process is to write scenes as they come to her and as she's inspired, and then she patches them together. So I did write it that way for The Memory of Us. But after that, I really found that a linear format did work best for me. So that is how I write now, in that way. But I do not really overthink things. I'm sure you've heard authors talk about I'm a plotter or I'm a pantser, and
yeah.
I'm absolutely a pantser, a fly by the seat of my pants person. And I think it's for two reasons. Number one, I consider myself a reader before a writer. I read 116 books last year. I think that reading is the very, very best writing education you can have. I don't think you need to go out and get an MFA. That's all fantastic. But if you read a lot, you can write. And so that I like to approach my writing as a reader. As I finish a chapter, I put my reader brain on and I go, what would I want to happen next if I was reading this? And I'll literally go there. In The Beautiful Strangers, I finished chapter 13 and I finished it with, come in, Kate, I have someone I want you to meet. And I start chapter 14 and I went, I have no idea who she's supposed to meet. I really didn't. It's just something I said. And then I thought, well, I need to open this door and do this. So I literally did not know what chapter 14 was going to be until I just got in there and started it. And the other reason I really like to be a pantser is because the history is so much better than anything that I could just create out of plot. So I need to leave big gaping holes in my basic plot to let the historical research inform the story. So I'm pantser all the way.
So you familiarize yourself with what actually happened, what the themes of the time and that are, and then just let your kind of subconscious writer mine those things that you've investigated?
Yes, but I don't overly research. I research just enough to feel like, okay, I know where this story's going to go. I have a general idea of what this is going to be, but I do the barest bit of historical research at that point. It's as I start writing and I get myself into a question and I go, oh, what would this have looked like, or how would she have acted, or what kind of telephone is she reaching for, those kind of things. And then I will stop what I'm writing and I'll go research it to make sure it's authentic. But in that process, I almost always find out some fact that I wouldn't have learned otherwise. And I go, oh, that has to be in the book. So that's why I like to leave myself lots and lots of room to play with the research as I go along.
After having 4 books done and out now, has your rewriting and revision process changed from the beginning with the 17 revisions on that book? Time's sake doesn't allow for that much revision anymore, but do you feel like as a writer you keep evolving so that your first drafts are closer to your finished product now?
Much, much closer. Before the Rain Falls, my second book was a huge, huge learning tool for me. What I turned in, my editor wanted me to take out 5 characters, rework the order of certain things. So it was a huge learning process. And I thought, I never want to edit like that again. So I'm going to try to get it right from the start. And so ever since then, I have. And like anything else, the more you do it, the better you get at it. And so I recently turned in to my editor my 5th book, the first draft of my first book. And she came back to me and she said, this could be published now. And this was my first draft. There's definitely work to do to make it better. I'm not saying we are going to publish it as it is. But she has been with me on books 2, 3, 4, and now this 5th one. So she's seen me grow, and she said, like, you're really starting to get it. So that was a huge relief. And I think it's because I have all these editing notes in my head from the previous books that I can write those kind of things into it as I go rather than having to be edit heavy later.
That's fantastic. As a writer who began having to kind of steal moments of time to write, and now as a successful writer, I would imagine that writing makes time for itself easier now than it did then. Do you have a daily writing habit? Do you block off that a certain time of day every day is sacred, or how do you approach your writing process now?
I'm starting to develop that. Since being in San Antonio, we've now moved to Virginia. I was very excited about being coastal. I let go of my real estate license. My husband is still licensed, so I still do help him in the business in some more administrative ways. But kid-wise, I've got one off in college, one's about to go in August, and the 2 others are old enough that they don't need mom hovering and homeschooling quite the same way. So I do find myself with a lot of time that I did not have in the very beginning. So I haven't developed an actual I get up at 5 a.m. and write because I do need to see what kind of help they all need during the day. But I am trying to get to it the goal I'm trying to set is about 1,000 words a day. And whatever time that happens, it doesn't matter. But that's kind of the goal. So I'm working on being consistent in that.
Fantastic. I know you mentioned you turned in book 5. I'm assuming we'll probably see that next year.
I don't have a date on it yet. It's probably going to be mid to late 2020, so we'll find that out. But I'm working on edits on that right now, and it's my first book that is fully about a real-life woman, and that has been kind of a whole different way to write. But I found out this story that was just so fascinating and had to be told, but I had to approach the research in a really different way because you have to balance, here's the real history of this real woman, but how do I add in the right amount of fiction to make it compelling and put it all together to present a story to somebody. So it's been exciting and daunting all at the same time, but I really like it and I'm excited to put it out there.
Amazing. Well, the new book is The Beautiful Strangers. It's out everywhere now. You can get it any way it's on audiobook and is it paperback? That's
paperback, Kindle,
yep.
Audio. Yeah.
Yep. It's out everywhere. We're going to send everybody to pick up their copy. Also, because I'm a McCartney fan and I'm a Camille Di Maio fan, I one-clicked The Memory of Us. So it's on my Kindle. I'm going to start reading that tonight. I can't wait to dig into that.
Great.
Camille, if people are just discovering you and your work right now and want to learn more about you and follow along with all that you're doing, is there a place they can connect with you online?
I am most active on Instagram, and so I'm pretty easy to find, Camille Di Maio _author. I'm the only Camille Di Maio out there, I think, that I've ever become aware of. So I'm easy to find there, Twitter, Facebook, BookBub, Goodreads, Amazon, all those places. But I am most active on Instagram, and I'm really good about responding to people when they reach out to me.
Excellent. Camille, we're going to send everybody to see you. The book again, The Beautiful Strangers, out everywhere now. Camille, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show.
Thank you, Hank. I enjoyed visiting with you.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
The ancient building wore the severe cassock colors of a Puritan minister, a uniform monochrome of slate-gray shingles and soot-gray clapboards, its shadowed upper windows cross-hatched like the facets of a spider's eye. The second story protruded beyond the first and bore the house's only ornament, 2 gray teardrops of wood, weeping from each corner of the building's stiff upper lip. The place would have looked sinister and foreboding in its shadowed alley if not for the die-cut silhouette of a dancing sheep, jaunty above the door, and the 2 front bay windows that blazed with colorful, welcoming light. The windows were hung with orbs of colored glass on staggered lengths of ribbon. Each orb glowed with autumnal reds and delicate greens, burgundy tints and pumpkin hues, dappled raspberry and clover lime, streaked with light and weightless as bubbles over a cauldron. The shelves below offered crystal skulls and silver daggers and horny devils, Celtic chalices and woven dream catchers in dreamcoat hues. A primitive broom leaned in a corner, ready for flight, and a rhapsodic nude in bronze clutched her goat-legged lover beneath a jackal bust of Anubis. The interior of the shop was even witchier. Above a crude and sooty fireplace, a stack of brick barely holding the shape of a chimney pushed through the barn-high roof, threading ancient beams that crisscrossed overhead. Brooms and kettles and Christmas lights dangled from these, alongside Halloween costumes and Chinese umbrellas, pointy hats and bundles of herbs. Jason wandered deeper into the shop. His fingers trailed across strange bronze statuary and Aztec masks of turquoise and lapis lazuli. He rolled his eyes at the luck candles and money charms, but goggled indecently at a nude and anatomically correct silver nymph with long golden hair that reminded him of Kate. "See anything you like?" Jason jumped, turned, and jumped again. The woman standing before him was the living embodiment of every hippy-dippy counterculture type he'd ever seen. Her hair was green, her face pale and round, her doughy body wrapped in some elaborately woven ethnic garb. Her eyebrows were black and pierced in little rows, and her eyes were heavily circled with midnight blue, as if she'd been sucker-punched by an oil slick. She tapped the glass over the nymph. "Admiring the goddess, I see." She'd practically caught him with porn. "You want to hold her? She won't break. Here." The woman flipped open a glass door and handed Jason the naked figure. "See how heavy she is? You could bang her against the wall all day and barely make a dent." She waggled her eyebrows, obviously enjoying his discomfort. He checked the price tag. $700? "The goddess is a symbol of love and fertility. Don't be ashamed of desiring her." The woman's long green fingernails plucked a long black cigarette from a long red case, and she lit it. "I sense," she blew smoke and studied its whorls, "dissatisfaction in love. Yes, I have just the thing." She pulled Jason into a side room where the smell of her clove smoke gave way to the skunky aromas of potpourri sachets, tea leaves, and hanging clutches of twiggy flowers. She searched, found a little bundle, and pressed it into his hand. "This will make you irresistible. Rub it on your nethers twice a day, and love shall surely find you." Jason made a face. The bundle smelled like cow manure. He didn't even want that on his hands.